Tonight on Localite, Katherine Cole, the author of Voodoo Vintners, sits down to discuss her book, her daily work with the Oregonian and MIX Magazine, and more. Katherine's book focuses on the quirky yet spiritual work of biodynamic winemaking at Oregon Vineyards. All that and more right now on Localite.
Well, Katherine, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for making the drive out to visit us.
It's an honor to be here.
Well, we're glad to have you. Let's start with, you're a columnist for the Oregonian.
Yes.
And MIX Magazine.
Mm-hmm.
Both of those, obviously, MIX Magazine is published by the Oregonian, so you started out with the Oregonian before getting involved with MIX, but let's go back even further. Let's start with, where are you from, and how did you get into this? And ultimately, how did you end up getting a job like you get, where you get to go around and critique wine?
Well, I'm going to go way back in history.
Perfect.
My great-grandfather owned a brewery in Missoula, Montana called Highlander Brewery. So I come from one of those families where good food, good wine, good beer has always been on the table, and it's just been a family tradition for me.
Okay.
I grew up in Seattle, and my parents were just avid wine drinkers growing up. They had friends who owned wineries. One of their friends started Katerina Winery in Eastern Washington.
Oh, really?
They had friends who owned Esquin Wine Merchants in Seattle. So, and actually, my father, back in the late 60s, dabbled in making wine with the Associated Vintners. They weren't called that at the time, but they were the first winery in Washington State.
Oh,
so
no kidding.
Every once in a while, he'll pull out his old Cabernet Sauvignon from like 1969 or 1970, and you know what? It's still pretty good. So I grew up in this environment where there was just wine all around me, and it just was a natural part of living.
Yeah, so it was, yeah, like you said, just a natural fit for you.
Yeah.
So when did the journalism piece, how did that fit in, and then ultimately end up where you are now?
After college, I just went straight to the Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism, mostly because I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do next, but it was really invaluable training. And I do like to underscore the fact that I was trained as a reporter. A lot of people think, well, I love wine, then I could be a wine writer. Well, you could, but a lot of what I do is just sitting at my desk, answering the phone, taking notes, fact-checking. You probably know this as well. Working in journalism is not as glamorous as people think it is. So
yeah.
Most of my time is just spent reporting and fact-checking, unfortunately.
So you're behind a desk more than you are behind, at a tasting room?
Absolutely. Yeah, I would say 99% of the time.
Really?
I'm just, typing and talking on the phone. Mm-hmm.
So you don't get to I always imagined somebody who's writing about wine, they've got all these fantastic bottles of wine around their office, and they're getting to sip them and all of that. That's not the case.
That sounds like fun.
It does. That's why I thought it sounded so great. That's not the case, though.
You know, it's funny because if you work with wine, whether you're a sommelier or a wine critic, critiquing wine is much different than drinking it for pleasure. A lot of tasting is just tasting and spitting out. A lot of tasting is blind, which means you put a paper bag over the bottle so you can't see what it is. And it's kind of a chore.
Really?
I mean, when you taste for a wine competition, which I recently have been at a couple in California, you taste through hundreds of wines a day, and it's really a chore. It's not fun. I mean, you're spitting it out, and it's coating your mouth, and it becomes tiring. It's not pleasurable at all.
So are you able to, because a lot of people who do something for a living don't want anything to do with it in their free time. So are you able to sit back and enjoy a glass of wine and still relish wine the way that people do that aren't critiquing it for a living?
Yes, I really enjoy just turning off that part of my brain, though. And so if someone says, oh, did you notice a little bit of this in that wine? I'll just say, oh, I don't want to think about it right now.
I just want to drink it.
But I do notice that I tend to just sip it more. I don't, sometimes people, I just want to drink a big glass of wine. I don't like to do that. I just like to drink it in small sips because maybe I'm just tired of tasting it so much.
Yeah.
I just want to have that little flavor in my mouth. And
so give me a little better idea of, in your position and writing your column, you said you take a lot of phone calls, take a lot of notes, do a lot of sitting at the desk or in front of the computer sort of a thing. What else, though, are you doing? Like, what's happening on those phone calls? What are you taking notes about?
Let's see. Anything from, finding out about new legislation that is passed that might affect wineries, finding out about any new, there are always new trends going on with winemaking, either around the world in terms of something like packaging, how people are creating new lighter bottles right now. That's kind of an interesting trend. Or within Oregon, there might be a new trend where wineries are planting a different type of grape that hasn't been planted here before. So just keeping an eye on what's new that's going on within the world of wine. Go ahead. Oh, and a lot of what I do also is just tracking down what wines are available where, because this is an industry where vintages are constantly changing, and what's out and available in stores is not always the wine that I am able to taste. And so there's a lot of just figuring out what readers are actually going to be able to go out and buy and bring home.
Yeah.
It sounds so boring, doesn't it?
No, it doesn't. It sounds very interesting. It sounds very calculated and much more so than I would probably think, just without having had this conversation with you. So tell me then, you mentioned a lighter bottle.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
That just popped up in my mind because I just wrote about this subject. One thing that really frustrates me about wine is that so many vintners are trying to do the right thing and grow their grapes sustainably and run sustainable businesses. It's very important to the wine industry, and especially in Oregon, and I think that's a great thing. But then they'll go and put their organically farmed or sustainably farmed grapes into this huge heavy bottle that weighs like 3 pounds, and you can't fit it into your wine rack at home. And think about the shipping costs of that, and they have to have that bottle shipped over from France where the bottle's made, and so that's using a lot of resources. It seems to me to be very wasteful.
Yeah, kind of counterproductive as far as the cause.
Yeah, and so I just had a little something run in the Oregonian about these new lighter bottles that are coming out. They're still glass, but it's just a lighter glass, and they're missing this thing that's called the punt, which is when you look at the bottom of a wine bottle, there's that dimple in the bottom, and sometimes it can be very unnecessarily pronounced.
Yeah.
And there are new bottles that don't even have that. You really don't need that. Although, if you're buying a more expensive bottle and you're in a restaurant, it is nice when the sommelier pours from the punt, which means he sticks his thumb up into the bottom of the bottle and pours from the bottle. That looks very elegant. And so that's part of the reason that exists.
Oh, okay.
But is it necessary? No.
Interesting. Okay, well, we come back. I want to talk more about this subject of wine and obviously your book, Voodoo Vintners. And so we'll find out more about Katherine Cole when we return. Be right back.
Still to come.
Biodynamic agriculture is really, really hot in wine right now. And so anyone who's a real wine geek knows about it and is curious about it and is asking questions about it. But when I sat down to write this book, there really weren't any books on the subject.